Well, good morning, everybody. As we come into the tail end of the month of May, I wanted to show you the month-to-date precipitation statistics. Now, these go through 7 a.m. on the 29th. And what's amazing about this is just kind of the split in the midsection of the country on who's had this moisture and who has not. And I'm really just drawn right into this part of Nebraska. You can see this southwestern corner of Nebraska is currently having its wettest May to this point on record. And this climate reporting district right in through here, which includes parts of I-80 coming through this section of Nebraska, is having its driest. So from one side of the state to the other, you can see this just incredible contrast. Now, throughout much of the Midwest, throughout much of the Great Lakes, we have been extremely dry. Michigan especially. Take a look at some of the numbers here in Michigan. But this extends into New England. It has hit parts of the Carolinas, although this weekend saw some incredible moisture come into this area. And it also extends down into lower Mississippi River Valley. Outside of that, extremely wet north to south through the plains. A lot of storms coming off of northern California on the eastern side of the Sierra Nevada into, Nevada, into Idaho and Montana. And so we just see this precipitation pattern in its setup and question how much longer are we going to continue to stay in this. And that's been kind of the big discussion for a while. So let's keep going with that. I want to show you some satellite data. I'd like to do this just as the sun was rising here. And we noticed that the smoke over Nova Scotia is significantly less than yesterday, but there is quite a bit of smoke throughout the Northeast as the sun is rising this morning. What I was most kind of interested in watching from last night was the complex of storms that was in parts of Nebraska and some of the storms that did get up into parts of Minnesota as well. If I just take you back last night, here's where those storms began. Parts of Montana, Wyoming, Colorado. They got into Nebraska, the Dakotas, and then watch again over parts of Minnesota. As these storms continue to brew, some of them putting down some rain in some very key areas that have missed out on some precipitation. And that's not to ignore the storms that are to the west of it or the low that we watched all weekend long dump the rain over parts of North and South Carolina, Virginia. But I was just keen to see if we could get these storms to continue in the overnight hours to press through the rest of Nebraska. So here's some of the radar data. Let's take you back. Let's just play it so you can see it. There's the complex of storms popping, the ones north in South Dakota and here in Minnesota, But it was just important for me to watch these storms coming through Nebraska because oftentimes as we get into summer, these really, really dry regions, which are here, tend to just not have the local moisture available to allow the storm to continue. Now, you notice that the storms fade out. I don't believe that had to do with the lack of moisture. I actually think it had to do with just the time of day. This is getting into the early morning hours and then eventually here into where the sun was rising. And so it's hard to maintain thunderstorm into the early morning hours due to the stability of the atmosphere. But as it stands, these storms did come through and hit some extremely dry areas, and it was incredible to see that rain, but it did not really make that large of a dent in the drought that's in the eastern part of Nebraska. So what did the last 3 days give us here? This is what the total accumulated precipitation looks like. And again, we had that low that came out and just got shoved into North Carolina, and it was pushed that way because of a high pressure cell to the north of it, helping to funnel the air in that direction. But some pretty heavy rains coming at a key time in the Carolinas and parts of Virginia, then over into parts of eastern, Kentucky, Tennessee, and West Virginia. Storms earlier this weekend down in lower Mississippi River Valley, but our corridor of heaviest storm activity is kind of tucked right in through those arrows there. And if I add on to this, sorry about that, there we go. This is the last week's worth of precipitation through midnight, or 12 a.m. this morning. We just noticed that it's the same areas that keep getting hit. So this is the last 3 days. This is adding the 4 days before that. Now, thinking again about Nebraska and just from one side of the state to the other, I pulled up what happened in Hastings because we kind of took a look at this a couple weeks ago. As they had just flatlined on precipitation, they got about 3/4 of an inch of rain. And so this just shows you the deficit that is still there to be made up. And kind of the most shocking map I've been looking at here for the last few days, this is the newest update for the last 14 days of precipitation anomalies. It's a percent of normal. And so it has been a setup where the places that have been getting the rain under this very, very weak flow regime just continue to get it. And that weak flow has been defined as troughing that kind of comes in like this, subtropical component of the jet that comes in like that, and then just a complete loss of jet stream level winds here. We've also had these lows that have sat over Florida, and then the one this weekend came up and curled into parts of the Carolinas. But all in through the lower Mississippi Valley, getting over to the Red River Valley here, and then in the north, throughout the Mississippi-Ohio Basin, clear to New England, and back up here and toward the Red River of the North, extremely dry conditions. And just to show you the 14-day in comparison to the 30-day, so this captures the last little bit of April and up to this point in May. And we just noticed that there's a lot of regions in through here, this whole area, that are sitting in this 20 to 60% range. So this upcoming forecast and the moisture that needs to return is absolutely critical to the success of the crop. Before I get into that, though, I'm just curious. I was looking at this yesterday. This is some of the newest data we have on NDVI, and I'll link this in the comments below. But just thinking about the rain that's coming to Texas, notice we are right now well above trend, which is the black line in terms of NDVI values, and we were way down here last year and got worse throughout the summer. We're in the top half of the distribution, and what's shaded in gray here is the last 20 years. We can just kind of keep stepping north of it. Let's go to Colorado. And again, we've really come out of the basement here with all this rain in May, and now we're looking at NDVI values that are slightly above average. Up to Montana, major jump up here as well. And you can kind of just come to this website, and I'll link it so you can bounce around and take a look at all sorts of different places. But my home state of Illinois, we're starting to slip and fall here. So we're just barely sitting below average where we are with NDVI. Neighboring state of Indiana, similar story here. So I would encourage you to kind of come out and play with this site. Again, I'll link it down in the comments below. Okay, where are we headed this week? If this map looks familiar, it's because the pattern has not yet changed. All right, we just continue to see storms here, storms running up the Central Plains, and we're going to watch again for some low pressure to kind of move along the coast of the United States. About the only difference is there are chances of isolated storms throughout this week as the heat builds into this section of the country. But you notice parts of Indiana, Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, New York, this whole region in through here, likely to be very dry. We're also dry throughout the Columbia Basin. The flow is kind of missing this area, coming in farther to the south, and that's going to miss out on that precip. Same thing for parts of the southwest here, which we're waiting on the monsoon to start this year, which again is anticipated to be weak. So this is it. The next 10 days, probability of getting at least an inch of precipitation. And I could have just pasted in the map from the last week, and it would look exactly the same as this one. Our drier areas identified as those spots who see a high probability of getting less than a half inch. But the only thing I can comment on it is this area in through here has gone from this 90 to 100% category, in some places down into the 80 to 90 or even the 70 to 80, which means we are finally getting out in the 10-day forecast, because the 10-day forecast gets us out to the 9th, right? We're finally getting out there to when we expect this pattern to begin to make its shift. So we need to talk about that. Here it is. This is what's going on all week long. You see this? There's the waves coming through. Here's the one to the south, a part of the subtropical jet. And here is the low that we're going to watch that's going to move across parts of Florida. In between, the flow is too weak. Look at the spacing of the iso heights. It's just gone. It's so weak in here. That's what I keep kind of reinforcing about this pattern. That's June 1st, going through the 2nd, and the 3rd, the 4th, and the 5th. Now, by the time we get to this weekend into early next week, the ridge is sitting right here. And to have ridges sitting right there in that part of the United States almost always have to happen with a trough that's over the Aleutian Islands. Okay, so trough here. So what you'll need to watch is the play between the trough of the Aleutian Islands and this ridge. Now, if you're in the West Coast, we love Aleutian Island troughs. If there's a trough there, we tend to get the flow that comes around the base of it coming into the west, preventing heat. But what we're going to see here is that trough. See it really developing here next Tuesday. That's when the ridge is the strongest. And then as we go forward into Thursday, it begins to fade and spread out, dips farther to the south. And where does the ridge go? The ridge that was here has now flattened out, and the flow is coming across the country like this. Now, notice the spacing of the iso heights, the black lines, tighter. And that's why once we get out there past the 8th, 9th, and 10th, I'm talking about the 12th, this is when we begin to see the models returning moisture to this area. All right, near term, severe weather threat today, tomorrow, and the next day. It's the same place it's been. But do note that the Storm Prediction Center's general thunderstorm risk area is expanding farther and farther to the east. See this? So this is where we start to see some isolated storms coming into this section of the United States. High-res model first. This is the NAM. Let's just play it forward to see where the convection is. A lot of scattered storms here still east today, kind of rock back and forth. Tonight, they're going to pop here and again in the same areas. As we go forward, see complexes of storms in the overnight through Wednesday morning coming through the central United States. And then as we get into the heat of the day on Wednesday, it's the same thing. Storms blow up here, isolated there, scattered showers and storms right along this part of the southeast. And it's just doing that. That's what this pattern is up to right now. Now, will it break? When does it break? That's the question we want to ask. So let me show you the latest data from both models. Now, this is total accumulated precip. Let's play through Tuesday into Wednesday and Thursday. Here we are Friday, getting into Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. So that's a week out right there, okay? And isolated storms through here, wettest conditions here. Now, we're going to go ahead and let the model run out past a week. And what I'm watching in the European is the timing of two things. Do you see the front passing through here? Watch this area right in through here. Just watch the change. That can only happen if the ridge is out. And it's moving out after a week from today. And I'm watching the development of some sort of troughing here that could possibly return some moisture to the Great Lakes. Now, the difference in models, the ECMWF, it only runs out 10 days. That's all it runs out. The operational run only goes out 10 days. The ensemble goes out 2 weeks. But the GFS runs out farther. It actually runs out 16 days. So here's the GFS. We go all the way out here to next Sunday into Monday. And again, it's a bit more generous with the moisture when you come out here for a week. But then watch what the GFS does. It brings in that same front, but it also has a deeper low. I'm just going to rock back and forth. Can you keep your eye right here? Rock back and forth on Lake Huron. It has a deeper low trying to return better moisture to this area. And might as well just show it to you. Okay, we don't often trust this model once it gets out there, of course, this far. But it is showing that there is something coming. And it's going to break through and start to deliver moisture farther to the east. But I need you to know something. Watching over the last couple of days, we've seen the performance of the GFS dropping while the ECMWF has kind of maintained. Now, this is only looking at 5 days, but it's trying to figure out how well it's matching the height pattern. So I just want you to be aware of that as well. So here's the key thing we're watching in both models. There's the ridge on Saturday, the 3rd. We watch it back up here, but this is the trough that we're going to watch very carefully to see if it can come in and drop off the temperatures. The GFS is much faster in the development of that trough, and then the subsequent troughs that form right here into the central United States. Watch this one in Texas that then ejects right over the Ohio Valley. We need, to be honest with you, the GFS to verify. It's not typically the highest performing model, but it is a great model. We need to watch it to see if it verifies, okay? From there, let's compare the models and just see when they're bringing in that precip. There's no doubt that the next week or so looks exactly the same. So you just continue to see flashes of green in through here. There's some weak low that's off the coast. And it's not going to be until we get out there past this weekend into early next week. Here comes the GFS bringing a front through a little earlier. Watch the European model right there. And it drags its front through. See it coming through? And the GFS with a much deeper low here, setting up by the 7th. Europeans weaker and farther off to the east. But it'll be after that this front, there it is, that's the one I'm watching, could come through after the 8th and really start to clear things out and give us a new precipitation pattern. So let's finish this up. Week 2, we're going to watch the CPC's data later today be revealed, and we're expecting this to start to shrink in all 3 models actually. But until then, wetter conditions identified in the same spots. The temperature side of this discussion, take a look at these high temperatures today. We're going to be cracking 90s here in this section of the country. Cooler in California. By Wednesday, the heat keeps coming into the Midwest. It's cooler south. It's cooler west. It's cooler here in the southeast. All of the heat is associated with the size of that ridge that's developing in the Great Lakes and retrograding here to northern Minnesota, the Dakotas, Manitoba, and Saskatchewan. That's Friday's high temperatures. Getting into Saturday, it's going to be a very hot Saturday. Getting into Sunday and Monday. Now notice at the end of this forecast where the heat's coming back, Cascades, Columbia Basin, Central Oregon, this is where the ridge begins its retreat. So we're watching this time period from the 5th to the 10th on the shifting that's going to happen. Because of that heat coming through, total evaporation is going to be high. We're looking at 1.75 inches in a week in this area. And if there is moisture to be evaporated out of the topsoil, this is its potential. That's the way we look at that. 7 days worth of GDDs. Some of these numbers are just very high. 170 GDDs across the I-states. And that, that's higher right now than we're going to see down in parts of Texas or in the southeast. That just shows you how much heat's coming into the midsection of the country. But we know, as we look at this 5-day sliding window of average temperature anomalies, that by day 5 through 10, the heat begins its migration to the west, this retrograding pattern. We get out there beyond that, and as the troughs start to settle in around the Great Lakes, we see some cooler weather here and a backing off of the heat. This whole time period, this region stays cooler. Whole time. That's a lot of thunderstorm activity. All right, last thing I want to talk about here is this. When we look at what happened since May 10th, we've noticed that we've had high pressure sitting here, here, and here. That is actually what we call the triple ridge. If it was July and we saw this, we would be talking about subtrend yields in the United States in terms of corn and soybeans especially, probably very subtrend. So what needs to happen is we need to shove this whole wave train of high pressure cells either east or west to start to give breaks to people and then have them continue to move or even fade. That will be the thing we'll be watching. And the good news is, just to show you why and when we're seeing this pattern change, the latest update on where the Pacific jet is right now it's very retracted. It's going to be retracted for much of the next 10 days, but it starts to make a poleward shift and extend, which means we're going to go from this to something that does like that. And if we can get that jet stream to move and open, that is what's going to give us, in about 10 days' time, a shift overall in the pattern across the United States. These are just the symptoms of the change that we're going to be watching. Very quickly, international weather, still very wet from Spain through southern Europe, all dry northern Europe, still normal precipitation, quite a bit above in some pockets here in Russia. We now see that the China plain's a little drier than normal, but the Manchurian plain wet. We see wetter conditions in Southeast Asia, and pockets of dryness still continue parts of Malaysia, getting into Indonesia, but the Philippines are quite wet. A lot of wet weather coming through on the winter wheat crop that's planted over here in parts of Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria, also around Perth. And we're going to watch carefully for this rain early this week, right now, to come through this part of southern Brazil to cap off what's been a big safrinha crop. Okay, thanks for a little bit extra time this morning. Had a lot of things I wanted to get out there, but we'll wrap it up here. Thanks.